But I wanted to get back to the issue of Palestine and bring into my audience just an explanation to someone who may not even know anything about the region. What is like the history that kind of got us from this point in the first place? Um, let's just say in the 40s, when Israel became a state in the first place, and the whole idea of Israel and the whole idea of the Palestinian territory is basically just shrinking more and more, or what was Palestine just shrinking more.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of history there, so I will try to condense it as much as I can. I think for anyone that's like new to the Palestine-Israel situation, the whole reason why this is kind of where it is today is because following World War II and the atrocities that were inflicted against the Jewish population during the Holocaust, all of like the world's nations knew that they needed to provide like a safe haven, that they needed to allow Jews a place to just kind of have some safety. And the Arab world was not new to providing safe haven for people throughout, the history of, especially like during the Ottoman Empire. There were a lot of different religions that found safe haven within the Ottoman Empire that they couldn't find within Europe. So, and that also included people that were followers of Judaism. So when it came to post World War II, Israel was, or Palestine was looked at as a region that was, they were willing to accept, I think it was between like 45 and maybe 80,000, might have been a little bit less, but they were willing to bring in about that many people to provide them with safe harbor. And what started to slowly happen was that as the that at that time the Ottoman Empire was like pretty much in like complete decline. And what happens with empires is that there's a lot of infighting. So there was a lot of infighting between the different Arab nations. There's power control going on, and the U.S. and the EU and Britain worked really well in keeping that division going and having like brother fight against brother, because that's really what they love to do. And they used that moment of the Palestinian people being willing to provide some space for Jewish people to say, okay, now we're just going to keep bringing more in. And that was when the Palestinians were starting to be like, okay, like what's going on here? We said we would do this many, but they weren't expecting to basically like take every person that said I want to go to Palestine because I'm a Jew and I need safe harbor. They were not prepared for that. It's a very small region. And then it turned into religious doctrine and ideology of who really deserves and should be in this area. And Jerusalem, especially, I mean, you can go back, 1,000 years. It's a very contested area between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. This is where those three religions basically started. So, as I'm sure lots of people can understand, there's lots of religious ideology that's fighting, and or not fighting, but it's like amping up certain bits of rhetoric of like who deserves what. But the thing is like the Palestinians were already there and settled. That was their land, that was their country. But over time in 1948, and then also in the 50s, as you move forward, there were so many different points of aggression between the Palestinians and the Israelis, I guess you would call them at that time. But because Israel was starting to be formed and they were getting so much monetary backing from especially like Britain and the US, they were just able to overtake and overpower the Palestinian people, because the Palestinians were not, they don't have a standing army, they don't have, the weaponry, and that is still the same thing to this day. But it's also the push that happened with the settlers coming in and building settlements. And that was something that really started to amp up what was going on in the region. And it was why, for a time, there were lots of, what people would call terrorist attacks, people being suicide bombers for, a while, because like I said, Palestinians didn't have and still don't have a standing army. The groups that they have, like Hamas, are what they consider their like rebel freedom fighter groups, but every other outside nation considers them to be a terrorist organization, a very convenient label to give. So, because of that, the Palestinians fighting against what they saw as continued encroachment into their land, into their holy spaces, and the building up of settlements, taking land, taking water, decimating orchards and orchards of olive trees. And olive trees are a very like, there, at least from my dad's point of view and his family, it was like the olive tree really represents a lot to them, from not just like a religious aspect, but just like from a cultural aspect. It was very important for them to have those trees because it represents the time for which they have been there, because some of these trees were over like 100 years old, and we're still seeing this today where the Israeli military is coming in and they're plowing over like 100-year, sometimes 200-year-old trees that have been in these families for generations. And it's that I always pose this after I say something like that, is like, what would you do if you're at home and a military force comes in, pulls you out of your home, bulldozes it, builds over it, and puts you behind a wall? How is that going to make you feel? And that's what Palestinians have been dealing with pretty much since 1948, because they have just been pushed and pushed and pushed. Their land has been taken from them. And what started as, we're totally willing to provide some safe harbor for people, it was like a, no good deed goes unpunished. And it was like they got punished for that good deed. And it was all because of the power backing Israel and them wanting to create the formation of Israel. And it's not just because a lot of people will say, oh, well, they deserve Israel. That's where they're from. If you look at religious texts, this is where, these Semitic peoples come from. But the thing is like all of the Semitic people come from there. The Arabs, the Palestinians, the Jews, the Christians, you could argue all of them have right to that land. Trying to find a way to have all of these different people come together and live together, I certainly don't have the answer for that. But what I would suggest for people is to not just immediately side with the state of Israel because it's what's so conveniently told to you in the media. It's that because it's so conveniently told to you in the media, you should question it a little bit. And the tactics that Israel uses against Palestinians, the United Nations and over 100 countries have said that these are violations of human rights. And that's seems to always kind of be a missing piece, is the focus is always on the few Palestinians that do horrific things. I'm not going to deny that they haven't done things. They have. It's that they are responding to what they see as aggression, and they do not have an outlet. They have to them, they have no other means of defending themselves, of defending their people, their land, and their heritage. And that's why I think the media does what they do in continuing to push the rhetoric that supports Israel and humanizing the Jewish people, but in the same breath, dehumanizing the Palestinians. And it's, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of, like I said, it's a lot of history. There's a lot that's happened in the region. And I would just say that, don't just immediately assume if a Palestinian has done something that it's just because they're a terrorist, like RFK Jr. was really wanting to push a couple of months ago, because it seems like he's really been kind of taken over by the Israel lobby. And he's pushing what I'm like, I remember a lot of what he's saying now. I'm like, that's rhetoric from 2002, 2003, 2006, when a lot of tensions were happening in Palestine because of the more building of settlements and also just the absolute indiscriminate killing of innocent Palestinians. There are so many children that have died because of what Israel has done in that region. And these are not terrorists. They are children, they are babies. So yeah, that's, I guess, I hope that was a concise enough kind of response to why that region is so rife for struggle and why there's so much tension, because there's so much fight amongst ideology, who gets what, and some people still trying to push like a two-state solution that I do not think is going to work until you deal with the Israeli government, because the Israeli government, especially right now, is getting more and more right wing, to the point where they're pissing off their own people.
Mhm.
So I think a reckoning will probably happen at some point, but Palestinians have been dealing with this for 75 years. And I am never remiss to say I have a lot of disgruntledness, and I feel like the Arab world has a lot of shame to account for, because they have allowed this to happen to the Palestinians. It didn't have to go down the way that it did, but so many people were like, nope, we're not going to fight this fight anymore. And they've just kind of left Palestinians to fend for themselves. And because those other outside countries, like especially a country like, Egypt or Saudi Arabia, they're getting also coziness with Britain, EU, and the US. They're benefiting from what is happening to the Palestinian people, because like so many other countries, it's capitalism comes in, and it becomes a money thing rather than a human thing. And it's sad to see what, a couple generations ago were brothers and sisters, and now they're fighting each other, and they're letting their own die, and it's really heartbreaking.